It's no secret that Volkswagen has struggled to crack the code for the American market. Their best sales year ever was quite some time ago, all the way back in 1970, when they sold 40% more new vehicles that year than they did last year in 2024 in the United States. But the Germans are nothing if not a persistent people, and they have a new game plan, and that is to shift from sedans and hatchbacks to American-sized SUVs. Today we're taking a look at the smallest Volkswagen SUV in America. This is the recently refreshed Volkswagen Taos, and it was designed to compete in the hottest segment in the United States right now, and compete with things like the Honda CR-V and the Toyota Corolla Cross. So obviously, we need to answer the question, has Volkswagen done enough? Is this the secret sauce to cracking the American market? Or is it just another okay Volkswagen that's not really going to push the bar? I have to admit, I've long had a soft spot for Volkswagen style and design. Some people might find the look boring. I find the look restrained and elegant. We also have premium touches that we don't find in all the competition, like full LED headlights, standard, and as long as we're not talking about the base model, every other Taos is also going to have some of the best adaptive headlights in this segment. In fact, I would say these are the best, tying with the Mazda CX-30 for that position. They have a nice bright high beam, and they have a very aggressive steering profile, which is really handy out on winding country roads where I live. We have a light bar that connects from one side to the other, definitely giving this kind of a Volkswagen Atlas meets Volkswagen Golf kind of look. Now, I also have to admit that as much as I like their styling and their chassis tuning, and as many times as a Volkswagen has been pretty high on my shopping list, I've never actually bought one, but we'll get to that at the end. As always, I'll take a deeper dive into pricing and comparisons at the end of the video, but right now you need to know that the big change is the price tag. The SEL trim gets 2 extra speakers, and there's a different Qi wireless charging mat, but that's basically it for 2026, other than the price bump. The S trim, which is the base model, is now $27,975. That's $1,000 more than last year. Well, $1,005 to be exact. The SEL trim, it's $705 more than last year, but we are not driving that SEL model. This is the mid-level trim with the black package. This is the SEL Black, and as equipped here, $31,465 for 2026. Interestingly, not every model has seen a price increase, so depending on exactly what you're looking for, it may not matter whether you wait for a 2026 or you might want to run out and buy a 2025 while you still can. With an overall length of 175.9 inches, this is on the long side of the subcompact SUV segment in the US. Now, at this point, some of our European viewers are thinking, hang on a minute, that is not a subcompact SUV. And in Europe, you'd be right, because Volkswagen, of course, has the T-Cross, the T-Roc, etc., and they have the Tiguan that's larger than this. Well, in the US, we don't get that Tiguan. Our Tiguan is your Tayron, which is even bigger than a European Tiguan. And that's why I put American-sized in air quotes. But this is almost exactly the same size as a Toyota Corolla Cross. But importantly, we have the Volkswagen practicality and style here. So we get a higher roofline and definitely a boxier design, generally speaking, which makes the interior more practical than that Corolla Cross. With Tayrons and Tiguans and Touaregs, oh my, maybe it's the naming scheme that's a problem for North America, but that's a subject for a different video. Style-wise, not a problem. Again, I think it's a blend of Golf and Atlas, and restrained and elegant is the name of the game. Except for these faux exhaust tips down here, which in the black trim, I think actually hide a bit better rather than having the silver ring that we find in the other trims. The real exhausts are under the bumper, but we actually have a bumper that sticks out a little bit from the rear. So if you're looking for a little bit of extra bump protection, we don't have just a flat back end like we do find in some of the competition. The hatch itself, though, is relatively vertical, although it is not powered in this model. We have an LED light pipe running from one side to the other and the illuminated Volkswagen logo that they've become known for. As with the front light modules, the rear light modules are full LEDs, including an amber turn signal and LED backup lights. For the 25 and 26 model years, every Taos gets the same engine. It's a 1.5-liter turbo that's been recently refreshed itself. It features a new turbocharger, new injectors, new intercooler, and a new transmission in the all-wheel drive trims. I have to admit, I've always liked Volkswagen's dual-clutch transmissions, but apparently not everybody was a fan. So instead, they swapped in a regular 8-speed automatic transmission. If you're not a fan of a CVT, which you find in the vast majority of the competitors in North America, you might want to check out this or a select number of competitors that also feature regular automatics. We get a bit more power out of this engine thanks to the other tweaks, 174 horsepower and 184 pound-feet of torque, so a little bit more torque than we find in the naturally aspirated competition. This engine and drivetrain is definitely focused on efficiency. You get 31 miles per gallon in the front-wheel drive models, like the one that we're testing here, and 28 miles per gallon if you choose the mechanical all-wheel drive system. There's no hybrid system under this hood, and that is one of the key reasons you might want to take a look at some of the competition, because 40+ MPG is definitely possible in some of those hybrid options. For the small SUV and crossover segment, I'm going to give these seats 10 out of 10 points. These are really quite comfortable, at least for my body shape, 6 feet tall, about 180 pounds. And importantly, we have lots of headroom. With over 40 inches of front headroom, you can put this seat really far up at 6 feet tall and still comfortably drive the vehicle. That makes the interior significantly more practical than some of the shorter options. In fact, with this seat all the way up, yeah, my head is touching the ceiling, but we're talking ridiculously high off the ground. If you like an upright sitting position, this is also going to be a good option. And generally speaking, I do like sitting more upright, like in a truck or a bigger SUV. This is never going to be that high off the ground, but you are going to have more of that upright seating position. I also appreciate the fact that the front seat tracks move really far rearward. So far rearward, in fact, that I'm more looking at that B-pillar than anything else. So if you have long legs, this is also going to be a great fit. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty decent range of motion. The front passenger seat does not move the same way that the driver's seat does. It is a manual seat design in this trim, but the driver does get two-way adjustable lumbar. If you're looking for a smaller SUV with a huge back seat, you definitely want to check out the Taos. That front seat again is adjusted for me in that relatively upright position, but certainly comfortable for me at 6 feet tall, and I have 9.5 inches of legroom left. When we measured the legroom in here versus something like a Corolla Cross, even with that front seat all the way back, and it moves several inches further rearward than in the Corolla Cross, we had more than 1 inch more distance between this seat back and that seat back. And in this position, just measure this out, we have 32 inches from seat back to seat back. That's more than enough room for some of those really big convertible child seats in the rear-facing position. So if you're a taller adult and you want to put a child seat behind you, this is going to be able to do that in a way that the Corolla Cross and most of the competition simply won't. That's because we get not just a lower floor, we also get a higher ceiling. You'll notice even if I'm in this middle seat, my head is nowhere near touching the ceiling. I still have about 1.5 inches of headroom if I put my head all the way back there, but sitting in a normal position, it's actually right below that piece of glass. On this side of the cabin, I had a 6'5" passenger comfortably up front. I still have several inches of legroom left. I have about 5 inches of legroom left there, so you'd still be able to put a rear-facing child seat on this passenger side of the Taos. We also get a slightly wider rear seat than we find in most of the competition. It's only fractions of an inch or maybe an inch wider than average, but it is still importantly wider. Now, when it comes to legroom, remember, the way that legroom is measured is it's from a theoretical hip point down there to a theoretical ankle point. Well, think about how that disadvantages vehicles that are very upright like this. Again, higher seat bottom cushion, lower floor, higher ceiling here, so the seating position is a bit more SUV-like, a bit more truck-like. That means that your ankle and your hip, they're actually kind of closer together in that angle versus a really stretched out vehicle where your ankles could be way out in front of you. So even though the number may appear smaller in the back than some of the competition, you should know it's actually a bit roomier and more comfortable. That low floor also helps out the cargo area, although you should know the front-wheel drive models get a little bit more cargo room than the all-wheel drive models, likely because of the differing suspension in the back. We do not have a fully independent suspension in this model, but you do if you choose the all-wheel drive option. It doesn't change our score in the 24-inch roller bag test. We were able to squeak 4 24-inch roller bags back here in either model. It just means that the floor is going to be a little bit higher. Also a little bit higher is the hatch itself, and that is something I really appreciate because in most of the entries in this segment, I end up bopping my head or being worried about bopping my head on the hatch, and here there's absolutely no worry unless you're maybe about 6'4", 6'5", so plenty of room. We do not have a power hatch here, however, there are some factory parts available and most dealers will install them on your Taos if you do want a power hatch. Unlike some Volkswagens, we don't have a 40-20-40 folding rear seat back, but we do still have a ski pass-through. That's a feature I like, and we still have a spare tire. It's a temporary, but I'm glad that it's under there. The load floor, however, it does not flip and fold. It does not go up to different heights or anything like that, and there's no covered storage by default. I'm glad Volkswagen sent us a mid-level trim because this is the most common way you're going to find the Taos configured on dealer lots. We have LED reading lights up here, no sunglass holder, but controls for the panoramic moonroof, the power shade, and the telematics options there. The sun visors do not slide to the side or have an extension. They're also not made of the same material as the headliner, but I don't think that's too much of a problem given the price tag. We have grab handles for 3 of the 4 seating positions. The driver does not get one. And that panoramic moonroof is really quite large. You can see it goes to just about the rear passenger's head, so lots and lots of airy light coming in with that. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and height adjustable head restraints here. The upholstery is kind of an imitation leather, sort of wetsuity material in the middle with fabric inserts as well. So kind of a combination of things with piping and contrasting stitching to help dress it up. The bolstering is relatively aggressive for a vehicle in this segment. So if you like a seat that hugs you a bit more, you're going to like these seats. If you're a larger person, you might find them a little bit restraining. We also have kind of interesting pattern on the seat bottom cushion. Again, kind of that wetsuit-like fabric insert right there that breathes a bit better. These seats are heated, but they're not ventilated. Moving over to the front doors, we find hard plastics at the bottom of the door, a soft touch armrest, the same sort of fabric that we find on the seats in this midsection of the door, and a soft touch injection molded upper section. The rear doors are styled very much the same, but almost everything is a hard plastic except for the armrest itself. Speaking of hard plastics, on the dashboard we find hard plastics on the top of the dashboard. Piano black here in the middle, that is going to scratch really quite easily, and there is an awful lot of it on the dashboard. But we do have a fabric insert, again matching the seat, sort of wetsuit-like fabric right there in that section, and then harder plastics down there at the bottom of the dash like you find in most of the competition, with a huge bin-style glove compartment in there. I had absolutely no problem fitting an 11-inch tablet computer inside. Speaking of tablet computer, it kind of looks like we have one grafted to the dash with a really big bezel here. We have the latest Volkswagen software for the most part here. So if we go back to that display, we find very similar software as the rest of their lineup. If you go to the menu there, you'll see that, and the car options right over there. But the screen itself is on the small side, and you'll really notice that when you use Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Again, a little on the small side. I don't think that's too big of a problem, though, given the price tag and most of the competition, which don't really have big screens either. We have big air vents here, some touch controls for the climate control system. These are illuminated at night in case you're worried. I'm not the biggest fan of the touch design. You can either slide that or you can just tap either side of that. I think it does work better than the system that we find in some of the Volkswagen electric products, however. We have a big Qi wireless charging mat. I would have no problem fitting my bigger smartphone in there if I didn't have it plugged in. I do appreciate the fact that you can go wired or wireless there. Engine start-stop buttons over there. A lot of button blanks around here. Just the parking brake is used there, auto start-stop enable disable, and the parking sensor enable disable button. Parking sensors are not standard in the S trim, but you will find them on most of the models on the dealer lot. We have 2 pretty big cup holders right there, although this one is a little bit close to the center console storage area, which itself is quite big. And then we have an armrest on top that does not do anything particularly special. So it doesn't ratchet into place, it doesn't slide forward and backward or anything like that. Moving over to the driver's side, we have a partial LCD instrument cluster. This is one of Volkswagen's latest designs, where we find an LED gauge for engine temperature and fuel level there, and then an LCD right in the middle of everything. It does have a few different layouts, so I can change the view between some different styles right there, but it's not quite as configurable as some. And of course, there's never going to be a moving map display from CarPlay or anything like that. The steering wheel, that's pretty Volkswagen typical. Volume up, down over here, track forward, backward over there. Buttons for that multifunction display, including the heated steering wheel button right there, and then the cruise control options over here on that stock. We have the pretty typical headlight control over there on that side, and nothing unusual going on with window switches. So they didn't remove them or reduce them or anything like that. And the only manual mode you'll get is over here on the console shifter. So it's right down there at the bottom. You move it down to the sport mode, and then over there to that side for up and down. All right, it's time to get the Taos out on the road. We have a front-wheel drive model here, but that's not too much of a problem because we don't have an awful lot of oomph from this 1.5 liter turbo. There's some tree work up ahead, so we're going to go ahead and slow it on down, but our 0 to 60 time in this model was 8.5 seconds. That's not exactly slow, but it's not exactly fast for this segment either. If you want to go really quick 0 to 60, you want something like a Mazda CX-30 turbo that is pretty darn fast. You get a 6-speed automatic transmission, not an 8-speed. I am a little bit bummed that Mazda has not upgraded that transmission yet, but in a segment full of CVTs, 6 speeds is actually totally fine, and 8 speeds is just an extra bit of sauce on the top, I guess you'd say. Now, speaking of 8 speeds, this has kind of a dual clutch feel to it, if I'm honest, especially if I am going slowly here and you're driving more moderately or gently. There's just a little bit of a delay in gear shifts, probably for clutch lifetime. It's a combination of the software programming for the engine and transmission that gives it kind of a dual clutch feel, I guess you could say. But in slow and go and stop and go driving, it's obvious that it's a regular automatic. It feels very smooth. Low speed crawl is absolutely not a problem. And that's logically the reason they went in this direction, as have other companies that have previously offered dual clutches in America. Not everybody is a fan of DCTs, especially if you live in suburbia or urban America and you're doing a lot of stop and go driving. The main reason to use a dual clutch transmission in a vehicle like this over an automatic is fuel efficiency. And they are leaving a few MPG on the table logically because of this regular automatic over the dual clutch, but that just seems to be customer preference. Now, back to the numbers. In our 60 to 0 stopping distance test, it took 129 feet for this model to stop from 60 back to 0. That was on the long side of things. And handling, it's not exactly the best handling entry in this segment. I like the way Volkswagen has tuned the suspension and the steering here. This one does not have the fully independent rear suspension, but I think it is relatively well done. It definitely feels engaging out on a road like this, but you'll notice the limit of the tires pretty quickly. On the other hand, as I have said with some Mazdas in the past, this is the kind of thing that you could fix yourself easily if you wanted to. If you wanted a better handling Taos, you could put grippier tires on it, wider tires on it, etc. But you cannot as easily fix the steering rack that we find in some of the competition. So if you're comparing this to, I don't know, something like a Kia Niro, it's okay, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to have the engaging steering feel that we find in this, or honestly in the Mazda CX-30 as well. What you will get in the Niro is a slightly quieter cabin and better fuel economy. In here at 50 miles an hour, we measured 63.5 decibels. This is not the loudest entry in the segment, but it's not the quietest either. And over a week of mixed driving, we've been averaging 28.5 miles per gallon. That is below the 31 mpg that we theoretically should be getting in the front-wheel drive model. If you were to drive a Kia Niro, though, admittedly, acceleration is going to be glacial because of that hybrid system, but you'll be getting 50 plus mpg, treating it relatively nicely. Driving it like you stole it, you'll still be getting 40 mpg, and that's a solid bump over what we find in this model. I'm sad because Volkswagen has had some pretty solid hybrid systems in the past. I really liked the way that they felt and their fuel economy, etc. But because of worldwide moves towards electrification and America's sort of song and dance backwards and forwards with electrification, Volkswagen decided not to bring any of those sorts of systems to their models in North America, at least not for now. We don't know what the future holds, but I would hope that maybe Volkswagen would consider just resurrecting one of those from the vault, dropping it back into something exactly like this Taos or the Tiguan, because I think it would be a really solid fit here. Out on our usual gravel road surface, I am a little bit sad that they didn't send us an all-wheel drive Taos, not just because of the extra traction, but because of the different rear suspension. In this model, we don't get a fully independent rear, but in the all-wheel drive model, we do. Now, that's a tickle that's pretty common in this segment because they're trying to reduce costs. So some of what you're paying for when you pay $1,700 for the all-wheel drive setup is not just all-wheel drive itself, it's actually the changed rear suspension. And you will notice the difference in cornering on gravel roads like this. I have to say that Volkswagen actually has a pretty decent semi-independent rear setup. It's not just on gravel roads where you'll notice the difference. On poorly paved asphalt roads like this right here, you'll notice the difference as well, especially when you start pushing the car harder. Now, the nice thing is that you can get that if you choose all-wheel drive. But if you choose a Mazda CX-30, you're never going to get a fully independent rear suspension. It's just not offered at all. Back out here on the paved road, you will notice the lack of independent rear suspension, but the main reason I give this a C when it comes to the ride quality has to do with the springs. They are on the firm side for this segment. Now, some people might like that and some people might not, but you're definitely going to get a more comfortable highway ride in some of the softer options in this segment. Now, remember that handling and ride quality are often two ends of the teeter-totter, and one of the reasons this has a good feel to it is that stiffer suspension design that we find here. But if you want something more comfortable, you might want to look at an HR-V or a Corolla Cross.
Now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. It's important to remember that the Taos is competing in one of the hottest and fastest growing segments in North America, so it's simply not possible to talk about all of the competition. The list you see on your screen is pretty big, but that is by no means the entire segment, and it spans from front-wheel drive vehicles that are sort of lifted hatchbacks, including some hybrids there, on up to some things that are not quite the same as the others, something like a Ford Bronco Sport, which is certainly significantly more off-road capable than the Taos and really everything else in this particular segment. There are even some electric options if you want to toss those into the mix as well. You can see that the Taos is priced on the lower end of this scale, starting from $27,975, including destination, on up to just over $38,000. That's well within the price span of most of the vehicles that you see right here on this list. But it's by no means the least expensive, nor is it the most expensive. I think value-wise, it's kind of solidly mid-pack. But what's not solidly mid-pack is our first competitor. We're just going to breeze through some of these quickly because, again, there's so many to get to. And that has to be the combination of the Chevy Trax and the Chevy Trailblazer. I think these two vehicles are the most underrated options in this segment, and that's why we need to talk about them. They're pretty inexpensive. The Trax starts at just under $23,000, making it one of the least expensive new vehicles available in the United States. And the combination of features and functions is actually pretty decent. We get some pretty big screens on the inside. Now, the biggest screens are not standard, but you can get those big screens in there for, I don't know, around $25,000 or so. So we're still talking a really inexpensive vehicle. Big screens on the inside, a really big practical cargo area, a lot of rear seat legroom, and handling that is surprisingly good. And that's one of the big things about the Trax that surprised me, is it is truly fun to drive. It's probably the combination of the small turbo engine, the regular 6-speed automatic transmission, and the fact that it's really lightweight, but for some reason Chevy decided to put some crazy big tires on it. Well, you know, not big in the general sense, but big when we're talking about vehicles in this segment. Now, if you want all-wheel drive, you can't get a Trax. That is the one limitation there. But you can get a Trailblazer, and that Trailblazer is still going to be quite inexpensive. It's also one of the few options, like the Taos, that has a regular automatic transmission, as long as you select all-wheel drive. So Trax has ye olde 6-speed automatic and less fuel-saving tech because of that low price tag. Trailblazer gets your choice of a CVT and front-wheel drive and more fuel-saving tech, or a 9-speed automatic transmission and all-wheel drive. But all of those are really good value options. Also a really good value is the Kia Niro. And I'm talking about it here simply because of its price tag, it's relatively affordable, and the fact that it gets over 50 miles per gallon. If you want to save some cash, get yourself a Niro. There's no all-wheel drive option, which is kind of sad, but maybe we'll see all-wheel drive and a hybrid in the upcoming redesign of the Seltos. We're not talking about the Seltos here because a new Seltos is on the way. Lots of rumors are talking about its arrival maybe sometime early 2026. We'll know more probably soon. But Niro is a really good option because not only is it cheap to buy, it's also cheap to keep around. It has some really low operational costs in this segment, not just in terms of fuel economy, but repairs, maintenance, and insurance, etc. It's all pretty inexpensive. Moving along, we have the best seller in this segment. That is the Subaru Crosstrek. So clearly we need to talk about this more. I think the Crosstrek is selling well because its price tag has always been pretty low. It has gone up a bit for 2026 because of the removal of some of the lower end features and just the general up creep of pricing in this segment, but it's still quite affordable, and it gains a new hybrid option, which is quite intriguing. This is basically Toyota's hybrid system repackaged and massaged into a Subaru using a Subaru engine, Subaru all-wheel drive, but the mechanics of a classic Toyota hybrid system. So we expect high reliability. The fuel economy is quite good. We're up in the mid to high 30 mpg range depending on how you treat it, and the power is pretty respectable as well. Nearly 200 200 horsepower out of that system. But even if you don't get that, you still get a lot of ground clearance, an interior that's really easy to live with. It definitely has kind of a rough and tumble vibe to it. The roof height is relatively low, so it makes putting stuff on the top really easy. If you're into outdoor sports or you got pets, etc., there are lots of Subaru accessories around. And that's really what Subaru is selling on, that outdoorsy vibe, the sort of promise that it'll be able to go further off the beaten path than some of these other options. And indeed, we do get a little bit more underbody protection and the wilderness trim options, etc. in Subaru's lineup than we find in some of the competition, but not as much as we get in something like a Bronco Sport. We should dive into the Corolla Cross next because it has been climbing its way up the sales charts lately, and I think for good reason. It's the promise of Toyota reliability, Toyota dealers are everywhere, it's relatively well priced, and there is of course a Toyota hybrid system as well. Now, if we're talking about the regular Corolla Cross, I wouldn't get it because the CVT is kind of lackluster, it's kind of sluggish feeling in pretty much every dimension. It's also pretty darn slow. And the hybrid is almost a no-compromise hybrid, other than the loss of the spare tire, which I think you maybe could massage yourself back there in the cargo compartment if you needed to. There's really little compromise, and it's going to be more reliable than the regular model. Also, it's going to have fantastic fuel economy. It does have all-wheel drive, so no mechanical all-wheel drive connection to the back. That is a bit of a bummer. But the other thing to keep in mind is that the interior is really quite small. That's the big downside to the Corolla Cross. It's on the small side of the segment dimensionally on the outside, and that translates to one of the smaller interiors in this segment, especially in the back seat. Also, the dashboard is a little bit old school for Toyota. The dashboard, I think, should have been completely redesigned for the Corolla Cross, and instead, even though it doesn't actually share really much of anything in the dashboard area with the regular Corolla, they decided to style it like a Corolla. And the Corolla's been on sale for quite some time, so I think that was a bit of a misstep. Next up, we should talk about the Mazda CX-30 because this is one of my favorites in this segment. I have complained about Mazda's 6-speed automatic in the past. I have complained about the turbo being maybe a little bit rough around the edges in the past. And I have complained about Mazda's lack of independent rear suspension and relatively skinny tires in the past. And while all of those are perfectly valid criticisms for the CX-5, the CX-50, and even the Mazda 3, when it comes to the CX-30, it's quite a different calculation because this is competing in a segment where independent rear suspensions are not always the norm, where CVTs are far more common than regular automatic transmissions, and getting over 200 horsepower out of any engine is pretty rare as well. And all of those things happen in the CX-30. You can get well over 200 horsepower, a regular automatic transmission, decent tires, and it's an awful lot of fun. It's also really quite attractive. I like the Mazda design language, both inside and outside. I know that there are complaints about ergonomics with the touchscreen system in the dashboard, etc., but I think that the CX-30 is a really great buy. It's not especially large on the inside, but when you look at its price tag, it's actually really well priced. It tops out at $39,990, so really not that much more than the Taos. Not really that much more than any of these other options we've been talking about, but you get that 2.5-liter turbocharged engine, which is absolutely fantastic in the CX-30. And that means it's time to bottom line the Taos, which is tricky because the Taos is a solid buy, but everything in this segment, honestly, with very few exceptions, is also a very solid buy. So let's look at this in two ways. Would I recommend the Taos over any of these other options? I don't necessarily know if I would, unless of course you like Volkswagen styling. And some of this really does, in a way, come down to styling preferences, the deal that you're going to get on the Volkswagen dealer lot, which can be honestly better on the Volkswagen Taos than especially something like a Honda HR-V or maybe the Corolla Cross, something along those lines, where those tend to sell closer to MSRP. But all things being equal, I think that there's some solid reasons to buy the competition. If you're an outdoorsy sort, you probably want the Bronco Sport or maybe the Subaru Crosstrek. If you want a hybrid, you've got the Crosstrek, the Corolla Cross, and the Niro, if you don't need all-wheel drive. If you want a really low-cost vehicle to keep around, you're really taking a look at something like the Niro or the Trax. Unless you're super concerned about reliability, then I would bet on something like that Corolla Cross before I bet on those others. But the Niro has a really solid track record. Hands down, cheap though, we're talking Trax, we're talking Trailblazer. Not just because of their MSRP, but because there's a lot of cash in the hood, lots of discounts, and inexpensive financing there. And if you're looking for fun, there is that Mazda CX-30 Turbo. Also, I think it's pretty darn good looking. Now, again, it's not that the Taos is bad looking. I think it looks fantastic. I think the interior is well done. I like the fact that they restyled and tweaked things here and there. I like the room that we find in the back seat. I like the cargo area. I think the performance is decent. But again, there are a lot of really solid options. So let me know where you would put the Taos in your lineup, or if you're shopping for one, why are you looking at the Taos, or if you bought one, let me know why you got it over these other options. Let me know down there, and we'll see all of you next week.